professional lighting, like opening a window?
Oh yeah, getting white light, like so much better.
Oh, beautiful! Yeah. Welcome to another exciting episode about Archmage Rises, the greatest role-playing ever made. And I can say that truthfully because I've been working on it this week, and I'm like, holy cow, this is the greatest RPG ever made. How do you feel about it, Nick?
It's coming along. It's funner every day, Thomas.
It can only get funner every day because it's terrible right now. Okay, so this week for the agenda we have, we're going to talk about NPCs. We're going to do a bit more of a deep dive into that, and then we're going to talk about the schedule, and we're going to talk about our winning animator. Let's just talk about the winning animator. So we are hiring an animator in order to bring the world to life and make the game feel better and look better and all that stuff. And so we met with 5 animators and tested 4 of them, and the results have come in. And Nick, you have looked at them, and what do you think?
I like number 1.
So we'll show number 1 right here, right now. So this is the winning entry according to Nick, and I agree with you. I think number 1's the winner.
Yay! It's unanimous, almost.
Why almost?
I don't know. Roger has said anything?
Yeah, Roger did. He did earlier today because he's in a different time zone for you, and he actually works 9 to 5. Okay. What time did you get up today?
The crack of 11.
Yeah, and how'd you feel about that?
It felt like it was early, but I did it. Okay. I did it.
Took one for the team. You're like, man, it's 11 a.m. I should get cracking on Archmage Rises.
Exactly. That calendar's not going to write itself.
Exactly. Yeah, it's unanimous. We all like audition number 1 the most. So, Chris Gortz, you are our new animator.
Yay!
Yay! So he will be going to the capital city in order to compete for food for our district. Oh, wait a minute. So I'll be contacting Chris to tell him that we're going to hire him as an animator, and or we could just let him watch this video and find out himself, right? We'll see how dedicated Chris is. So yeah, I haven't actually told him. I haven't talked to him because I haven't even talked to you about.
Yeah, that's the first I've heard. Man, the battle system's gonna look so good.
Yeah, it's gonna be sweet. You know, it's important to hire based on talent, right? Like other people had different kind of strengths and weaknesses. You know, one guy was really interested in the game, and he seemed like he was really into role playing and that kind of stuff. But we have to go with who can put out the best animations. Even if he hates role-playing games, who can put out the best animations?
I think they were really good entries. Like there were really good animators. I just thought that the first one, the 3D-ness of it was like, you know, some of the best I've seen with Spine. It really looks like it's a 3D model, and I think that for that perspective, at least for the battle that the test was, it looks really convincing. Yeah,
he did a good job. He said he put in about 8 to 10 hours of rigging it in order to, and then model it. Sorry, not model, rig it, and then idle. And then it was about 3 or 4 or 5 hours in order to do the actual combat animation. So, anyways, I'm impressed with his dedication. So there you go. Hard work pays off, and I think he put more time into it than the other animators. I don't know, but to me it looks that way. So hard work pays off, and he gets the job.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's talk about NPCs. So some of the inspiration for the NPCs of the game. Well, let me just take a big step back. I want the NPCs to pass the Turing test.
Hey, well, that's ambitious.
Yeah, there's no shortage of ambition over here in Richards Landing, Ontario. With a population of 400 known for their ambition.
So you have to be, you know, crafty to survive on the island, Thomas.
Yeah, especially when it snows 3 out of 5 days. I was just shoveling again today. Yeehaw. It's March and I'm still shoveling. But, you know, come June, it'll snow less. So that'll be great.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, the NPCs are the part of the world that I think are really going to bring it to life. I mean, there's a lot of things we could do in the map and add weather effects and that kind of stuff, but the part that's really going to connect with the player and make it rewarding and interesting to play again and again and again is the NPCs. And there's a couple of inspirations that I have for that. Obviously, from the pen and paper world, just playing D&D. When you have a game master, they are actually playing out the character, whether you're talking third person, like, you know, he sneers at you and tells you that whatever, so-and-so has been kidnapped, right? Or in the first person, is like, ha, 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 I kidnapped so-and-so, or whatever. Like, however that's played out, there's a real person right there that is responding to the queries of the players, to their choices. And then when the GM goes back after the session, you know, maybe they're making some notes about, like, okay, they said this, so now this is what's going to happen in the story, and that's what's going to happen in the story, right? And so making the NPCs react realistically. And so that's one of the big promises. I mean, if you look at our website, there's, I don't know, about 32 big promises in this game, and so that's one of the big promises. And so this week I've been focused on designing that out and really kind of bringing that to life. And so I've circled back to some of my original inspiration just to make sure you know, I'm capturing the right elements, right? So like when I play a game, for instance, like The Sims, there's certain aspects of The Sims I'm like, yeah, that's right, I want to capture that and bring that to Archmage Rises. Not all the urinating and bathing. That part, we don't need that in this game, okay? So it's a medieval fantasy world and there's no bathing. So so the elements that I think are really good and will shine in a role-playing game, I'm trying to bring those out of The Sims. Another one is Tropico. I don't know if you've played Tropico. Have you played that before?
No, but I've seen it.
Nick, that's like saying, have you had chocolate cake before? And the person says, oh no, but I've seen it.
I've smelled it before.
Yeah, so I know exactly what you're talking about. And as far as cake recommendations go, German chocolate cake is fantastic.
Too much coconut.
I love coconut.
Coconut does not belong on a cake.
Oh, you have just upset the whole nation of Germany. And if anything in the 20th century has told you anything, it's don't upset Germany. Come on. So anyway, in Tropico, I'm going to throw up some of the screens right here. So in Tropico, you play as a dictator of a Caribbean island, and starts off kind of in the 50s, I think in the 50s, and you build up the island and the industry, and you make choices about what buildings you're going to build. So it's like a little bit of SimCity, but a little bit of The Sims as well. So each one of the citizens that lives in your Caribbean island has like housing and food needs and a whole bunch of things. But there's something about that game that just has this magic appeal that the people feel real. So you have those little people like walking around on the map, and they feel real for some reason. Maybe it's because they're named, and then they have different interests, and they have factions that they belong to. So they might be a part of like the communist faction, or they might be a part of the religious faction, or the intellectual faction, and they can be part of multiple factions. And so when you do things in the game, it impacts mainly the factions, and then seeing what the people react to you like, and so I want to take, I don't know, just making those little NPCs feel real. I want to bring that to Archmage Rises. Now we don't have the whole like walking around thing, but I'm not sure that part's really important. Started working on Archmage in 2013, and Ken Levine, the creator of BioShock, System Shock 2, Freedom Force, a whole bunch of narrative games, BioShock Infinite, he ran a studio called Irrational Games for 17 plus years. And somebody said, hey, you should really check out what Ken Levine is doing with what he calls narrative Legos. And so we're going to talk about what Ken Levine talked about at his GDC talk in 2014 about narrative Legos. Now, you hadn't seen that video before. I had sent it to you earlier this week. And what do you think of that video?
I thought it was great. I thought when I was watching it, I was like, this seems a lot like Archmage Rises. Which I assume meant that you had seen that and built the idea of Archmage Rises, but it turns out that you had come up with these ideas before.
Yeah, I think that, well, yeah, that's true. So I started Archmage Rises in 2013, and I had a bunch of ideas about, like, how do we bring the tabletop to real life in a computer game? And so I was focused on that and had all these ideas about how you could use AI and randomization and those kinds of things in order to maybe bring that to life, right? And so you and I were talking a bit early in 2014, and so I was kind of researching that, playing around with it and stuff, and not sure, I don't know if it was possible, or if it was even a good idea or something. Like, maybe nobody's done it because it's a bad idea, right? Like, these are the things I don't know, because I don't come from AAA, really, from the industry. I come from a professional software background, web, database, mobile. And so I'm working on it, and then I came across this video, and I watched it, and I was like, holy cow, I'm on the right track. Like, basically, whatever Ken said, I'm like, I'm just going to do that. So so Ken Levine gave that talk in 2014, and it's now 2017. So it's been 3 years, and Ken has sort of announced his latest game to kind of utilize these things, called Ghost Story. But there's really no details about it. And so we might maybe be the first one to come out with basically implementing Ken's ideas. And that doesn't mean that we're necessarily doing it better than him or worse than him or anything. Like, it's a core idea, and then different people are going to take it in different ways, right? So so we're going to dive into some of the things that Ken was talking about and talk about why that's important to Archmage Rises. Are you ready? Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Are you ready?
But tweet it, and most importantly, if it's something useful to you, steal whatever you want from it. I don't know how much it's going to be useful because it's pretty early, but there's nothing proprietary here that you should be remotely nervous about leveraging for your own stuff. All right, so we talked some about the negatives of linear narrative. It's incredibly expensive to make. The individual pieces don't speak to each other. They do emotionally, like what happened to Booker at the beginning of Infinite talk to what happened at the end in the player's mind, but the game, there's nothing in the game in the way in Civilization your choices you make at the beginning really make an effect at the end, like in a meaningful way, which types of cities you build, which types of cultural trees you've taken. They don't really do that in linear narrative. Branching does exist in a lot of games, not so much in our games, but there's still X number of states. And what I want to talk today is not X number of states, but X to the Y number of states. I haven't taken math since 1983, so I think that's right. It also, linear narrative doesn't really fully embrace the unique power of games, which is replayable and player-driven. As much as I love the narratives we did, really we were so much feeling, we knew the constraints of it so much that we kind of made a lot of meta commentary on constraints, because it is a constraint, and though I love that form, I think we sort of said what we had to say, and we want to see what's past it. And most importantly, it's not player-driven. You are seeing the same story your friend is seeing, or you're seeing X of Y versions of a story your friend is seeing. Multiple endings still mean a fixed number of player states. There's 5 endings, there's not X to the Y endings. And one of the most frustrating parts for me is you can only add into a narrative game traditionally. Sorry, add on to a narrative game, meaning here's another chunk which you play that is subsequent to what you already played. Where games like Civilization, games like XCOM, you can add into the experience and enhance the experience in the very beginning of the game. So that's going to be a focus of what we talk about today as well. I don't want to underplay the work that's being done in this area. I think, if you look at stuff at BioWare, the stuff at, the Witcher guys are doing, there's a lot of really great work about opening up narrative, but I think they're taking a fundamentally different approach. But in no way do I want to say their work isn't extraordinary.
So that's what Ken had to say. So what do you think of that, Nick? What are you getting out of what he talks about there?
I totally agree. Like, as a guy who enjoys his story from environmental storytelling and not necessarily like reading text or cutscenes, I think like this is definitely an approach that speaks to me. I kind of like to go my own way, and if I keep getting ripped into a linear narrative, then it just feels like I'm kind of like skirting around the game, but I'm always getting pulled back to what they want me to do.
How he talks about how expensive it is to make, right? To make these linear games that just get more and more and more expensive. The voice acting has to be better than the last one. Production values have to be higher, right? but then he goes in and talks about branching, and you and I have both played the Mass Effect games, and when Mass Effect 3's ending came out, a lot of people were upset about, like, hey, none of my choices actually mattered. Like, I pulled these save files all the way from from version 1, and you know, now they're not making any difference. And you know, as he says, there's only so much branching you can do, right? And then the final thing that he talks about, and he talks about a little bit later in the video as well, is how you can only add on to the game. And what he loves about XCOM and Civilization is how you can add in, because they're system-based games. And so when I saw that, I was just like, yeah, that's exactly what we should do. We should try and apply that to role-playing games. And then Ken starts giving examples of how a role-playing game should be made. It's like, what? It's like I found the cookbook that just gave me the recipe. So let's see what he has to say about that.
Okay, what is a star? A star is an NPC with a set of capital P passions, a defined term, which I'll define in a minute. What's passion? Okay, these are not full psychological models. You know, as I said, Tech Before has been trying to really fully simulate a human being and all, you know, and how they work, but I'm not really trying to do that. Let's go to literature and media. So you know a bunch of stuff about Luke Skywalker. He has passions, right? What are Luke's passions? He wants to prove himself. He wants to go on adventures. He has issues with his dad. These are things that really define him. There's things that probably exist. We all have things that exist. And think about, just forget about Luke. Just forget the people you know, people you work with. You know a bunch about their passions, but like, you don't really know about their kinky, weird shit that goes on at home. And maybe you don't even want to know. So there are things that don't really matter. You know, maybe Luke is a vegetarian. Maybe he's one of those really jerky vegetarians who won't stop. I'm a vegetarian, so I kind of know. Here's an example. Frank hates elves. You kill an elf. Woo! He likes you for that, and his passion in this regard will move towards the positive. Nice and simple. On the other side, he hates elves. You help an elf of any kind. You know, you do a quest for an elf. You rescue an elf. You build a house for an elf. You woo an elf. He's going to feel more negative about this. This is all pretty simple, and you've seen some stuff like this in games before already. Frank has 3 passions that you know about the beginning. And let's say the passions are: he hates elves, he wants a temple to the old gods built, not the new gods, the old gods, and he wants to woo Barbara the orc because she's beautiful. And you can impact all these passions. You can help him build the temple. You can help him prove himself to Barbara. All, you know, these are all normal sort of questing things and building things and crafting things and fighting things and dungeoning things and collecting things. But they're all impacted by you. These won't move on their own except what you do.
Okay, so that was Ken talking about stars and passions. And how do you think that applies here to Archmage?
Well, I think, you know, on the back end, you've designed a lot of this stuff already. The idea that people are, they're affected by the things that they care about, whether that's people or their jobs or things that they are interested in. And we've talked a lot about making people more realistic by not necessarily adding tons of text, but making them, you know, react properly to the things they care about.
Yeah. One thing that jumped out to me on this kind of third watching of it is how he talks about the difference between a person and a character. And that's really important. It didn't hit me the first time that I saw it, but as I thought about it more, it was like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense, because I've seen discussions, you know, when we talked about Guido's post on Gamasutra, and you know, they're talking about, like, really the only way we're going to be able to get these emergent stories in a role-playing world is really to build a neural net, and it has to be a neural net that's at least as intelligent as a 10-year-old, and you know, it's going to be 50 years before we ever get that and whatever. So it's kind of like, well, let's not even try. And what Ken's talking about here is, because he's a theater major, so that's kind of a cool background to come to the game. So he's a theater major, and he's like, who cares about making a person, right? Luke Skywalker has these 3 passions. That's kind of enough to hold him together in our mind and say, yeah, Luke Skywalker, he's real. He's a real person, but really he's not a real person. We don't care about his vegetarianism and his tooth decay. He's, right. You know, he's real enough. And I think that is one of the guiding principles of this game, is that Archmage Rises is not 10,000 neural nets that are all working together in order to create these emergent stories. frankly, we don't have the budget, or I don't even have the smarts in order to do that. But we can make it real enough that who cares? It's super fun and it's engaging, so I don't care what's behind the scenes.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, so that's the approach that we're taking. And so when he talks here about passions, that's some of the work that I've been doing this week, especially, is coming up with what are those passions of our characters. And then the second and most important part is what are the verbs that the NPCs can use in order to act on those passions. So for instance, if somebody has a crush on somebody else, what are those verbs that they can do to enact on that passion? So there's actually a big difference here between what Ken's talking about, because his is a player-only world where things only happen in a static environment. So it's exactly like Skyrim. Like, you go walking up to the blacksmith is always there to serve you, unless, you know, they follow the day-night cycle or whatever. Basically, they're always there and they never change. But in our game world, the NPCs interact with NPCs. So that's a huge difference. So what that means is, if the blacksmith has a crush on the barmaid, he doesn't just stand around waiting for the PC to come up and talk to him about that and like, hey, can you go put in a good word for me? If you're not there to do that, he does it himself. And so there's verbs like stalk or flirt or tell joke that the NPCs can do to each other. And so yeah, we're going to give our NPCs a series of passions. Ken says the minimum number is 3. I'm going to believe him. And we'll start with a minimum number of 3 and see how that plays. And if it plays like garbage, we'll give him 4, or we'll give him 2, or whatever. Figure out what the right number is for us. But, you know, we'll start from there. So, yeah, I'm excited to get that in.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea, too, because we need to simulate, you know, some of the past. So when you talk to an NPC, they're not going to be a blank slate, right? They need to have some kind of history. So if we're able to simulate throughout the game the type of things that they can have, then we can back simulate when the game starts to create, you know, more of a believable starting state. So I think it's worth doing.
You just gave away all of our secrets. Nobody's going to play the game because now they can see through it. Thanks a lot for that, Nick.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah, okay.
About characters, you know, why are there only 5 characters in each city? Well, there's going to be a lot more characters, but there will be what I call drones. And they're very simple. Their macro bar, they just have a macro bar, is a function of all the other of the stars in that town's macro bars. And basically, they're just going to be guards and hirelings and scouts and spies and foragers and shopkeepers who aren't complicated, but they just sort of feel generally how the town feels about you. But they won't be able to give you the kind of benefits that the stars will be able to give you. So that we'll populate the world, but not with millions of stars. I won't go too deep into this slide, but there's like a whole list of things you can accomplish for people. You probably see them, a lot of them in other games. Some of them could be new. You know, worshiping gods, killing people, rescuing people, collecting.
Okay, so what do you think of that, Nick?
I think that sounds good.
Okay. So Ken there talked about an aggregate of, or a sum or an average, he didn't know the right term to put, but some kind of average of all of what he calls stars in his system, and applying that to the rest of the people in the town, and he calls them drones because basically they don't matter. And so that's another place where we are deviating from what he's talking about, because it's 2017 and our computers are like light speed faster than the computers he was talking about in 2014. So we actually made every single NPC a star. So you can go up and you can talk to any NPC and you can interact with them and you can fight them and you can love them and whatever you want to do. So we don't have that drone differentiation. But we do have this thing called the town reputation, which is basically an aggregate of what everybody in the town kind of feels about you, right? So if like 6 people hate you and 20 people love you, well, in general, then people in the town love you. Unless it's the town lord that is the one that hates you. And so there's some weighting that goes on in our averaging to make that work. So basically, yeah, we are doing just what he said there.
Okay, so replayability, and that's central to this. Games we've made generally have had add-ons. I'm very fond of them, but they're add-ons, they're not add-ins. You add it to the end of the experience. Games like Civilization, XCOM add in to the situation. Allow you to start the game over and play a very different feeling version of the game. So obviously the player will have each playthrough, they can choose different stars to befriend, different people to take on board, different people to turn against, and that's player driven. They can support the same characters but to different extents. Then let's talk about the passion pool. Okay, so let's say Frank the Orc actually has 10, we write, produce, record, cast 10 different whole passion sets for him. But in each game, we only get 3. We choose at random 3 of them. So like we all have different stages in our life where we care about different things. You're encountering Frank at a different stage of his life. He's still the same guy, still the same character. But at one point of his life, he cares about hating the elves, who temple the old gods, and he wants to woo Barbara. But then he's married, and he still hates the elves, but his marriage is not going the way he thought, so maybe he secretly loves Roma the elf. And he wants something different in his life now. And he also is, he's looking to his retirement, he really wants a piece of the cat's eye medallion. And so he's a different guy this time. He may have other secret passions. So that's, when you come into the game, you'll still see the same people, but they may have different goals. And of course, we can make, over time, new passions, new characters, new quests, new factions, all those things available as time goes on.
So Ken's talking about replayability, and I know that you can't stand that, Nick, but why don't you just tell us what your thoughts are?
I really like roguelikes, games that you can play over and over again and try and not just min-max, but play things, in a different way mechanically. I think this is an interesting idea of how you can make the story replayable. So I haven't really seen that done really well before, and so I haven't really explored it that much, but I do really like to be able to, play games with different choices and sort of make the best out of a good or a bad situation. I think that's really satisfying to me.
Yeah, so I was just out for dinner with my wife, and I was explaining to her about what I did this week, and her eyes glazed over, and she nodded very politely. But I'll tell you and the rest of the world, because I'm pretty proud of it. And so I've been working on these passions and verbs that the NPCs can use, and what I really love is how they intermix. Like they have all these multiple connection points. So for instance, somebody can have a passion of overthrowing the government. So they have an anarchist passion. And one of the actions that they can take is to vandalize and cause unrest, right? That's like lighting fires or those kinds of things, okay? So he could do those things. And then there's a chance that while he's doing those things on his turn in the game, he could get caught. And so if he gets caught, then he ends up in prison. So the player can go into the mayor's office, go to the dungeons, and see somebody in prison. And why are they there? Because they were following their particular passion, but they got caught doing that particular passion, right? And so you can ask them, why are you here? And he's like, well, I'm trying to overthrow the government, and I lit this building on fire, and they caught me, right? And so it's just like, wow. But that may never happen again in that game, or may never happen again if you start the new game. But then another example of that is somebody would have a passion of drinking. They just love to drink. I mean, who doesn't really, right? So, so they love drinking, and then there's a chance when they go and they act on that passion of drinking that they act on it again, and they act on it again. Like it can accumulate, and so then they reach this new status of drunk. When they hit the status of drunk, then they can take one of 4 actions, and one of those actions can be insulting someone, fornicating with somebody, and crime, or basically vandalism. Okay, so when they do that, the same interconnection points are being reused, which is somebody can see that happen, and then they can get arrested. And so you can find that person in the dungeon and ask them, how did you get here? He's like, I don't know, I had a couple of drinks and I woke up here, right? And so by having enough of these passions and enough of the actions that they can take on those passions, I think that we can have a really compelling world that is replayable, and maybe even infinitely replayable. So that's one thing I really want to try and capture from the roguelike, and something that I'm really happy that you're really big on in playing roguelikes. I mean, I've played some roguelikes, but not nearly to the extent you have. And so as long as we can nail that, as long as your $30 or so you spend on Archmage Rises gives you 30 years of entertainment, I will feel like I did my job, right?
That seems like a good bargain. $1 a year.
$1 a year of entertainment. I mean, I don't want to lay out some standard that AAA can't meet, but you know, $1 a year of entertainment is what we're going for here, folks. So I'm excited about those things, and yeah, really inspired by Ken Levine's talk. So I recommend for those of you who are game developers or just generally interested in role-playing games and stuff, go and watch his talk, because I really think that his talk is part of the future of games and role-playing games in particular. The fact that it comes from somebody who's so well respected within the industry. I mean, in a sense, it's like Sid Meier gets up and starts talking about this. You know, other people took notice of this, and there's other people like Storybricks is a company that got quite a bit of funding from Sony that was working on a similar kind of thing, but then they went bankrupt. So that set things back a bit, but that's okay because it made room for Archmage Rises. And so basically, like I said kind of earlier, is like, hey, we're taking Ken Levine at his word. That's right. We're taking Ken Levine at his word. So Ken, if our game sucks, it's all your fault. We watched your video and we did what you said. But if it works out really well, then it's all this guy's fault. And Nick too.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the talk is really good. He's really succinct about it, and I think that it's a pretty simplified version, but I think it would definitely work, especially since, you know, he's coming back from having like a linear game with really high production values and trying to figure out a way of how to leverage that. We're going the other way around, right? We're trying to,
just really low production values, just like bottom of the barrel.
Yeah, you know, we're scrappy, and you know, we're definitely biting off more than we can chew every day, and learning a lot. But I think that like since we're not doing voiceovers and we're not doing a lot of things that he expected, I think, or he would be doing, you know, making this really AAA quality voice and everything. I think that we can create more content. You know, maybe it'll be text.
Yeah.
But if we can make it believable, the way people react to things, and make them feel alive, then I think that's plenty. And personally, I'd rather have more content than voiceovers. That's just me.
Well, you can read. I mean, not a lot of people can,
yeah.
Right? It's like, this is not a common skill, so
right.
Stop bragging. So, yeah, I totally agree. And the choice to go with text versus, say, you know, voiceover and that kind of thing was not really budget driven. Like, it, you know, early on, I was like, man, I think the only way this can really work is to be text driven, because you know, taking a line, using the drunk example, right? Like, wow, I'm so wasted, right? Like, if you have text that is tied to that particular state and the player is in the vicinity in which to see that state, and therefore you throw that text on the screen, it always works. Whereas if it's a voiceover, you hear it the first time, you're like, hey, wow, look at that guy, he's so wasted, right? And then you hear it the second time, and it's like the same voice, or you know, there's 5 voices or something, right? And then eventually it has to start, you know, going through them, and you're like, that's not that guy's voice, and like the whole thing falls apart. Whereas with text, when you read it in your own head, you can give whatever voice you want, right? And so we're leveraging that to the extreme.
Yeah, and I think even more, like, I think it's more interesting the actions, you know, making the actions of the NPCs more believable rather than the things that they say, because I think that's more compelling anyway. You know, the fact that they seem like they're alive. I mean, if you were to be able to create the world's best procedurally generated text system, it'd be like being in a chat room, right? I mean, it would be cool, but it's still a chat room.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Yeah.
So unless voice synthesizer technology improves enough that you don't need voice actors anymore,
right?
You know, it's anyway. So that's a conscious choice that we made in order to do that. So I think that's probably enough for this week. Wow, we recorded 23 minutes already, and
it's gonna be the longest one ever for sure.
Yeah. I apologize. It's been a long one. We're gonna have to cut fan feedback and the schedule update, but we'll get on to all that next week. But I thought it was important that we talk about the NPCs and really what's going on under the hood here, and what's driving this project. Because once we get these NPCs, when we get this right, it will blow everyone away. I am totally convinced of that, and I'm the guy working on it. So if it sucked, I would be the first to know. Like, wow, this sucks. we got to do something. Quick, change the website. Take all that stuff out. But you know, I've been working on it this week, and I really think that we can pull it off because Nick is so smart. So
yeah, right.
I have confidence.
It's all on your shoulders, Thomas.
It's all ideas till I email them to you. Okay, well, let's call it a night. And thanks everybody for watching this, and thanks for your interest in Archmage Rises. And we will see you next week.
All right, bye.
Bye.